They laughed at him before they feared him. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. The year was 1940. Europe was burning. Entire armies were collapsing in weeks. German units rolled forward with tanks, machine guns, and artillery, the most efficient war machine the continent had ever seen. And walking toward them was a man with a sword. Not a bayonet, not a ceremonial dagger, a full-length medieval longsword, carried openly, bouncing against his leg as he moved. Some German soldiers genuinely thought it was a joke. They had seen many strange things in the war already: desperate civilians, broken retreating units, terrified prisoners. But this was different. This was absurd. A British officer charging in a modern war, carrying a sword and a bow like something ripped out of the history book. They laughed. They wouldn't be laughing for long, because the man with the sword wasn't insane. He wasn't pretending. And he wasn't alone in his head, only in the way he chose to fight. His name was Jack Churchill, and the Germans would eventually give him a nickname that carried both confusion and fear. They called him Mad Jack. Jack Churchill was born in 1906 into a military family. War wasn't foreign to him. It was expected. But from early on, it was clear that Jack didn't experience the world the same way most men did. He was brilliant, talented, unusual. He played the bagpipes professionally. He was an accomplished archer, good enough to compete internationally. He loved old weapons, not as antiques, but as tools. When the Second World War began, Jack didn't just enlist. He arrived, already decided on the kind of soldier he intended to be. While others trained with rifles and submachine guns, Jack showed up with three things: a longbow, a set of bagpipes, and a Scottish broadsword. He insisted on carrying all three into combat, not for tradition, not for morale, but because he fully intended to use them. Most officers would have been laughed out of the army for even suggesting it. Jack wasn't. He was too competent, too confident, too effective to dismiss. The British Army tolerated him at first. Then they watched him fight. The first confirmed kill of the war by a British soldier did not come from a rifle or a machine gun. It came from Jack Churchill's bow. In France, during the chaotic early fighting, German troops were advancing rapidly. Units were cut off, communications were shattered, and nobody really knew where the front line was anymore. Jack did. He moved quietly, deliberately. He saw a German soldier ahead, unaware, exposed, confident in his numbers and technology. Jack didn't raise a rifle. He drew an arrow. At close range, the arrow struck true. The German soldier collapsed without a sound. That moment alone should have ended the jokes. It didn't, because this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lucky shot. It was the opening statement of a man who believed modern warfare had forgotten something important: fear. As the war progressed, Jack Churchill's reputation spread, not just among British units, but among the enemy as well. German soldiers began reporting strange encounters, sudden attacks from nowhere, confusion in the dark, bagpipes heard in places they should never be, men falling before anyone realized a fight had started, and always, afterward, the same description: a British officer with a sword. Some laughed when they heard it. Others didn't, because those who encountered him directly rarely encountered him twice. The Germans were trained to recognize threats: rifles, machine guns, artillery, tanks, aircraft. A man with a sword didn't fit the model, which meant he slipped through their expectations. They hesitated. They stared. They laughed. And in that hesitation, that single crack in modern discipline, Jack Churchill attacked. What followed would include hand-to-hand charges against armed troops, prisoners taken with nothing but confidence and surprise, German positions collapsing because the impossible had just happened. By the time the laughter stopped, the damage was already done, and Jack Churchill was just getting started. The laughter usually came first. German soldiers saw him before they understood him: a tall British officer, helmet slightly crooked, sword hanging openly at his side. No attempt to hide it. No embellishment, no ruse. They assumed it was theater, amorality, some kind of madness. And in war, assumptions kill. By 1943, Jack Churchill was fighting in Italy, where German defensive lines turned mountains, villages, and narrow roads into traps. The terrain favored ambushes, close combat, and sudden violence. Exactly the kind of war Jack excelled at. During one patrol, his unit encountered a German position holding high ground. Machine guns covered the approaches. Mortars were registered. A frontal assault would have been suicide. Jack didn't suggest a plan. He simply stood up, with his sword drawn. The Germans saw him first. A lone figure emerging from cover, walking forward instead of crawling, not firing, not running. Some of them laughed. One officer reportedly shouted something sarcastic across the line. Another raised binoculars, trying to understand what he was seeing. That moment of disbelief was all Jack needed. He charged. Jack Churchill did not fight like a normal officer. He fought like someone who understood psychology better than tactics. The human brain is trained to recognize patterns. A charging man with a rifle makes sense. A charging man with a sword does not. German soldiers hesitated, not because they were cowards, but because the situation broke their expectations. Jack closed the distance fast. The first man went down before he could properly aim. The second tried to raise his weapon and froze. The third ran. Within seconds, the position collapsed. What should have been a costly assault turned into a sudden rout. German soldiers retreated downhill, firing wildly, shouting warnings that sounded insane even to themselves. A British officer with a sword is attacking. The reports didn't help their credibility. Jack didn't just attack positions. He entered them. In another engagement, his unit approached a German-held village at night. Recon suggested resistance, but not heavy fortifications. Still dangerous. Still uncertain. Jack moved ahead of his men. He didn't sneak. He walked. Bagpipes slung over his shoulder. At the edge of the village, he stopped, raised the pipes, and began to play. The sound echoed through the streets, loud, unmistakable, completely wrong. German soldiers inside the village panicked. This wasn't how attacks started. There was no artillery, no suppressive fire, just music drifting through the dark. Jack then charged, sword out, shouting, moving faster than logic allowed. The effect was catastrophic. German soldiers broke. Some fled. Others surrendered outright, convinced they were about to be overrun by something far larger than a single officer. Jack took prisoners, not with a gun, not with numbers, but with shock. His most infamous moment came when he captured an entire group of German soldiers, alone. Accounts vary slightly, but the core remains consistent. Jack encountered a German unit in a position that should have overpowered him instantly. Instead of retreating or calling for support, he did the opposite. He stepped forward. Sword visible, posture relaxed, voice calm. He ordered them to surrender. Some laughed. Then he moved. What followed was chaos. Confusion. Men shouting over each other. Weapons dropped in panic. Orders misunderstood or ignored. By the time anyone regained control, Jack Churchill was standing over a group of disarmed German soldiers, escorting them back as prisoners. One man, a sword, no lockup. By now, the Germans had stopped to laugh, but they still didn't understand him. They tried to classify him as reckless, then as insane, then as propaganda. None of it fit, because Jack Churchill wasn't fearless. He was deliberate. He understood that fear works both ways, and that breaking expectations can be deadlier than firepower. The sword wasn't a gimmick. It was a weapon aimed directly at the enemy's confidence. And it worked. The Germans would eventually capture Jack Churchill. Even then, the story wouldn't end the way they expect, because for Jack, surrender was never the final act. And the Germans were about to learn that laughing at him had been the least of their mistakes. Eventually, the Germans stopped trying to understand Jack Churchill. They decided to remove him. By 1944, his reputation had spread far enough that German units were no longer laughing when reports mentioned a British officer with a sword. They were irritated, embarrassed, angry, because men like Jack weren't supposed to exist in modern war. And yet, he kept appearing. During an operation in Yugoslavia, Jack and his unit were tasked with supporting partisan forces against German positions on the Adriatic coast. The fighting was brutal, chaotic, and confused, the kind of environment where Jack thrived. During an assault on the island of Brac, things went wrong. German forces were stronger than expected. Fire came from multiple directions. The attack stalled. Men went down. Jack did what he always did. He stood up, bagpipes in hand. As bullets snapped through the air, Jack began to play. Not as a joke, not as a signal, but because, to him, battle demanded ceremony. Moments later, a grenade exploded nearby. Jack was knocked unconscious. When he woke up, the fight was over. And for the first time in the war, Jack Churchill was a prisoner. The Germans were fascinated. They searched him carefully. They expected hidden weapons, tricks, explosives. What they found instead only confused them more. A sword, bagpipes, a longbow, arrows. This was not the equipment of a normal soldier. They questioned him. Who sent you? Why do you fight like this? Is this some kind of deception? Jack gave them nothing useful. The Germans eventually concluded he must be mentally unstable, or worse, symbolic. A man meant to unsettle, to humiliate, to mock modern warfare itself. They sent him to a prisoner of war camp. They believed the problem was solved. They were wrong. Jack Churchill did not believe in captivity, not philosophically. Literally, the moment he arrived at the camp, he began studying it. The fences, the guard routines, the blind spots, the habits of the men watching him. Other prisoners noticed something unsettling. Jack was calm, too calm. While others planned survival, Jack planned movement. Escape wasn't a question of if, only how. Within weeks, Jack made his move. He escaped, not with an elaborate disguise or a tunnel, but with speed, audacity, and the same confidence that had undone German soldiers in the field. He ran. Through countryside crawling with patrols, through terrain he barely knew, through territory that should have killed him. He was recaptured. Most prisoners would have stopped there. Jack didn't. He escaped again. This time, he made it far enough that German authorities began to panic. Not because of the damage he caused, but because of what he represented. A man who refused to stay contained. Eventually, Jack was sent to a more secure camp, Colditz. Colditz Castle was where the Germans sent prisoners they considered incorrigible. Men who escaped too often. Men who inspired others. Men who refused to accept limits. Jack fit perfectly. Even there, he planned. Even there, he looked for exits. Even there, the Germans knew they were dealing with something abnormal. The war ended before Jack could escape again, which by his own admission disappointed him. When Allied forces liberated Colditz, Jack Churchill did not celebrate. He asked a question instead. "Why did you stop the war?" he said later. "I was enjoying it. It wasn't bravado. It was honesty." The Germans had laughed at him first. Then they feared him. Then they tried to cage him. None of it worked, because Jack Churchill was never playing the same game. When the war ended, the Germans wrote reports. They cataloged losses. They analyzed failures. They tried to understand what had gone wrong. Jack Churchill never fit into any of it. He wasn't a tactical anomaly. He wasn't a statistical outlier. He wasn't a propaganda myth. He was something worse. He was proof that the system could be broken by one man who refused to behave correctly. German doctrine was built on predictability. Modern weapons, clear chains of command, standard reactions under pressure. Jack Churchill violated all of it. He attacked when logic said retreat. He advanced when firepower said stop. He used confidence where others used numbers. And most dangerously, he made soldiers hesitate. That hesitation didn't show up on casualty reports, but showed up everywhere else. German soldiers who encountered Jack didn't describe him as brave. They described him as wrong, something that shouldn't exist in modern war. A man who ignored the script. In after-action reports, phrases appeared again and again. Unexpected behavior, unusual tactics, psychological disruption. They never wrote what they were really thinking, but they had been embarrassed that a man with a sword had made them doubt rifles and machine guns. Jack didn't care. After the war, he didn't write a memoir glorifying himself. He didn't lecture on heroism. He didn't soften his story. He simply moved on. He served in later conflicts. He lived fully. He remained unapologetic. When asked why he carried a sword, he answered plainly, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." To him, the explanation was obvious. The war tried to reduce men to numbers. Jack Churchill refused. The Germans tried to classify him. They failed because Jack wasn't insane. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't performing. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was showing that morale, expectation, and confidence could be weapons. Weapons the Germans never learned how to defend against. They laughed at him first, then they stopped laughing. And by the time they understood what kind of man they were dealing with, it was already too late. Jack Churchill did not win the war. He did not change its outcome. He did not alter the grand strategy or rewrite history books. And yet, the Germans never forgot him, because Jack Churchill represented something far more dangerous than firepower. He represented uncertainty. Modern warfare depends on rules. Not written ones, but psychological ones. Expectations, patterns, assumptions about how an enemy will behave when confronted with overwhelming force. The Germans understood tanks. They understood artillery. They understood machine guns. They did not understand a man who refused to behave correctly. Jack Churchill did not break German defenses by killing the most soldiers or destroying the most equipment. He broke something far more fragile. He broke their confidence that the battlefield made sense. When German soldiers laughed at him, it wasn't cruelty. It was relief. Relief that this strange figure didn't fit the category of a real threat. Relief that modern weapons still ruled the field. Relief that war remained predictable. That relief never lasted, because the moment Jack attacked, the laughter turned into hesitation. And hesitation in combat is lethal. Men died not because Jack was faster or stronger, but because they paused, because their brains tried to reconcile something that shouldn't have been happening. A sword where there should have been a rifle. Bagpipes where there should have been silence. Confidence where there should have been fear. History often remembers courage as something loud. Screaming charges. Desperate last stands. Men throwing themselves forward into gunfire. Jack Churchill's courage was quieter. It was the refusal to accept the enemy's definition of reality. He didn't try to outgun the Germans. He didn't try to outnumber them. He didn't even try to outthink them tactically. He attacked the one thing they never armored: their expectations. That is why his story still works today. Not because swords are impressive, not because bagpipes are strange, but because modern systems, military or otherwise, are built on predictability. And predictability is fragile. The Germans never wrote a doctrine for men like Jack Churchill. They couldn't. You can plan for tanks. You can plan for artillery. You can plan for numbers. You cannot plan for someone who refuses to play the game you prepared for. After the war, Jack Churchill faded quietly into history. No speeches, no political career, no attempt to turn his reputation into legend. He didn't need to. His story survived because it carried a lesson that outlived the war itself. That confidence can be a weapon. That fear can be reversed. That sometimes the most dangerous thing on a battlefield is not firepower, but disbelief. The Germans laughed at Jack Churchill. Then they stopped, not because he killed the most men, but because he proved something that no army likes to admit. That control is an illusion. And once it cracks, everything else follows. That is why this story matters. Not because it is strange, not because it is entertaining, but because it reminds us that history is not only shaped by machines and numbers. Sometimes, it is shaped by a single man who walks forward, carrying a sword, and dares the world to explain why he shouldn't.